What's up, people? Welcome back to a brand new video, and today I'm going to be updating my 2026 Senate prediction. The last time I made one of these was, crazy enough, 7 months ago, so much has happened, and there's tons of changes to make to my previous prediction. The Senate is extremely important. They are basically the final check before something gets sent over to the president. So if Democrats were to somehow flip this, it would make a massive difference to Trump's second term. And more realistically, if Democrats were to be able to flip a couple seats here, then it would make things much easier for them to win the Senate in 2028 and give a possible Democratic president who could win in 2028 a full trifecta to get tons of stuff done. So however the Senate goes in 2026 is extremely important. So let's just get to it. We have 35 seats here to cover, starting off with the safe Democratic races, or the ones that I think will go to Democrats by over 15 points, starting off with the state of Oregon. This one shouldn't be much of a surprise. Also Colorado. Then we got Delaware, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Illinois. It looks like there's going to be a competitive primary battle here since the incumbent Dick Durbin retired. There's been a couple primary polls, but it looks like it's going to be a pretty close primary, so we'll just have to see who wins out on that. But I still think it's going to be around D plus 16, and I believe that's it. I should specify right out of the gate that I believe 2026 right now is going to be around a D plus 4 to 5 national environment, just to preface this prediction. Now for the safe Republican states, so shouldn't be surprises here. Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana. Mississippi could be below 15 just because of the environment, but for now, I'm going to hold off on that. Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia. It looks like there's going to be a pretty close primary battle in Kentucky for the Republicans. We'll just have to see who wins out there. There's David Cameron. There's Nate Morris. But obviously, no matter who wins the primary, it's safe R. And the final safe R Senate seat is actually the state of Florida. I know this might seem like a little much for Florida, but it was almost safe in 2024. And Ashley Moody, the Republican incumbent here who replaced Marco Rubio, is a great candidate. And Florida's Florida. It's turning to the right super fast, and it's always overperforming anyone's expectations for it and how red it can get. So yeah, I'm going to make it safe. And I think Ashley Moody is going to overperform Byron Donalds, who's going to be the governor nominee probably, by a solid couple points. So that puts the Republicans at 43 seats, Democrats at 40. Now for the likely Democratic races, or the ones that I think will go to Democrats by between 15 and 5 points, starting off with the state of New Mexico. I believe this is Ben Ray Lujan's seat. He is kind of an underperformer. He only won by 6 in 2020, but I still think he'll win by a pretty solid margin of around 10 points, mainly just because the environment, and there was a very good candidate against him in 2020 who I don't think is going to run here. So I'm going to keep it at around D plus 10. Next, we got New Jersey. It's turning to the right pretty fast. So although Cory Booker is a great candidate and more of an overperformer, I still don't really think that it's going to be over 15, just because that would be a 9-point overperformance of Kamala Harris, and I just don't really see that happening, although it seriously could since Cory Booker is a great candidate. But for now, I've got it at around D plus 13, with Cory Booker seriously overperforming a lot of the recent Democratic statewide performances we've seen in New Jersey. Then we got Minnesota. It looks like this one's going to be a very close primary battle on who's going to succeed Tina Smith. You've got Joyce Craig. You've got Peggy Flanagan. Those are the top 2 candidates, and it looks like it's going to be a complete dogfight between them. Originally, Peggy Flanagan looked like she had the very, very, very strong edge, but then Joyce Craig started to get some endorsements. She even got one from Tammy Baldwin, who's a senator from Wisconsin, which I don't think they would have given that if Joyce Craig looked like she was gonna lose by a bunch. So this could actually be a pretty close primary. I think Joyce Craig would win by around 8 in the general, while Peggy Flanagan would win by around 6, and she's a much weaker candidate. Actually, I think Joyce Craig would win by around 10. She's a great overperformer in her district in suburban Minneapolis. I should mention, if the Republicans do try and nominate Royce White again after he already lost by a massive margin in 2020, I think it could go to safe, especially with Joyce Craig. But even with Peggy Flanagan, it would definitely be over 10, just because Royce White is Royce White. But still, I don't think they're going to nominate him. So I'm going to keep it at around D plus 8 for Joyce Craig and D plus 6 for Peggy Flanagan. If I had to bet money, I'd probably say Peggy Flanagan was the primary, but it could really be either of them. Next, we got Virginia. Mike, what? Huh? Mark Warner is up for re-election, and he is a very, very, very strong candidate, a massive performer, really beloved in Virginia, and I think he'll win re-election pretty easily. by around like 10 to 13 points. And the final likely Democratic state that I have for Democrats is the state of New Hampshire. The extremely good Democratic incumbent, Jeanne Shaheen, is actually retiring, and it looks like the Democratic nominee is going to be Chris Pappas, who is a great candidate. I might be mispronouncing that. It could be like Pappas. I think it's Pappas. Pappas is a great candidate. He overperforms in his district a lot, and him representing already half the state, like New Hampshire is only 2 congressional districts. So since he is already a representative who overperforms a bunch in one of those 2, then half the state already loves him, and the other half, they already like know of him. So it's going to be pretty easy for him to win by a pretty decent margin. His opponent looks like he's going to be Scott Brown, who was the former Republican senator from Massachusetts, who then carpetbagged to New Hampshire 10 years ago to like go against Jeanne Shaheen, who lost by around like 3 points in a red wave. So I think he's very overrated as a candidate since he lost by 3 to a vulnerable incumbent in a red wave, which was 2014, which was like as red as 2018 was blue. So I don't really have that much faith in him as a candidate. You know, he's still got those carpetbagging allegations, and Chris Pappas is a great candidate, even if he's not the incumbent yet. So I'm going to have him winning by around like 6 to 7. Underperforming a lot of the big Democratic overperformances we've seen in New Hampshire, but that's largely just because he's going against a decently strong opponent in Scott Brown. Now for the likely Republican seats, first of all, we got Montana. This one I only think is going to be under 15 just because of the national environment, like pulling it under 15. It could seriously be over, but for now I've got it at around like R plus 14. Then we got Kansas. So Roger Marshall is the incumbent here, and he won by around 12 in 2020. And he's a decent candidate, but Kansas is trending to the left. And I think Democrats could put up someone decent here, especially since it looks like it's going to be a decent year for Kansas Democrats, you know, with the governor's race probably being a few points closer than this one. But I still think it's around like R plus 10 to like 13, especially since Laura Kelly isn't running for this. So I've got it at like likely R. Next up, we got Nebraska. This one is super interesting, and I think it's the Democrats' closest pathway to a majority because Dan Osborne is running again. And if you don't remember, he was the independent who ran in 2024, who went against Deb Fischer and got the race within 7 points, which was massive. He ran a populist campaign and somehow managed to tie her to Hillary Clinton. He's a great candidate. The issue is, though, that first of all, he's running against Pete Ricketts this time, who is a much better candidate. He's the former governor. He's much more well-liked than Deb Fischer, who was a horrible campaigner. And second of all, he's running a second time, which, like, that's not very good if you're, like, this novel candidate. If you run and then lose, the more times that you run again, you'll just become more and more of a weaker candidate until you're eventually just straight up a bad candidate. If you want examples of that, look at Beto O'Rourke. Like, look at Stacey Abrams. Like, you don't want to be that. So I don't really think he's gonna do that well. But for some things that are on his side, Trump's not on the ballot anymore, which means a lot of Trump voters aren't going to turn out as much. And they're not just going to vote straight like red down ballot. Second of all, it's not going to be as red of a year as 2024, where it's going to be a much bluer year. So that's going to help him. So overall, I think both of those sides of good things for him and bad things for him kind of like balance out, and it ends up being around 2 points redder than it was in 2024, to where it ends up being around 4 points redder than it was in 2024, like 4 to 3, and it's around like R plus 9. Although this race is very volatile and he's been underestimated in the past, so I don't really want to make the same mistake. And I think he could seriously overperform and get Democrats that 51st seat. Although he's an independent, I will say, but like he's Democrats' best chance at 51 seats. Next up, we got Texas. This is basically like the state of the hour because Ken Paxton was looking like he was going to primary John Cornyn. And Ken Paxton was like this super terrible candidate for Texas Republicans. Some stuff came out about him. His wife is divorcing him. People are shocked that he cheated when he's cheated multiple times before. So, like, that's not that big of a thing for him. But since it's during campaign season, I think it's going to hurt him a lot more than a lot of his previous scandals. And there's been a lot of discussion on if he might now lose to John Cornyn in the primary. And I'm pretty 50-50 on it. I will say if it's Ken Paxton now, I think it goes to around like R plus 4. And you might be like, Sammy, this is a blue wave. And he's a super horrible candidate. Why isn't it like tilt Democratic? You know, Mark Robinson underperformed Trump by like 17. But here's the thing. The Texas Democrats are just in complete shambles. And I have zero faith in them to be able to take advantage of this, even if he was the nominee. So I don't even think it goes blue or it's even within 3. Now, assuming that John Cornyn is the nominee, He's a very, very, very strong candidate, especially in the suburbs. I think he would lose a lot of support amongst like Latino voters in the Rio Grande Valley, which Republicans have been gaining in a lot, and the Texas Democratic Party has been neglecting in. But I still think he'd win by a very, very, very solid margin, being carried by those suburbs. Now, the Democratic nominee looks like it's going to be Colin Allred, who is a decent candidate, but much like what we were talking about with like Dan Osborne, this is his second time running. He ran in 2024 and lost by 9. So I think that's going to hurt him a bit. So he'd be a bit weaker. But much like what we talked about with Dan Osborne, bluer year, Trump's not on the ballot, so that does help him. Overall, I think, like I said, if it's Ken Paxton, then it's around like Paxton +4. And if it's John Cornyn, then it's around like Cornyn +10 to maybe 11 or 12. He is a very strong candidate, and this is a Trump +13 state. Next up, we got Alaska. The Republican incumbent is Dan Sullivan, who's kind of mid. He's not really super loved. He's also not really super hated. Now, you never know for Alaska Democrats on like, maybe they're going to nominate someone super good. It's a very weird state like that where, you know, people can randomly split their ballots a bunch of the time and like vote for someone, and you know, all of a sudden Mary Peltola is in Congress. But I do not think Mary Peltola is going to run for this. I think she's either going to go for House or for governor or just retire. So I don't really think Democrats are going to find another Mary Peltola, at least like for now. So I'm going to have it at around like R+8, just because Dan Sullivan's kind of mid, but it is a bluer year. So I'm going to average that out with Alaska's partisan lean, and you know, there you get R+8. And now for South Carolina. This already puts the Republicans at 49 seats. So if I was the Democrats, I'd be sweating. So South Carolina is represented by Lindsey Graham, who is under some primary threat, possibly. If you want to know who I think would be primaried here, John Cornyn possibly, and Bill Cassidy probably in Louisiana. But for South Carolina, I don't think Lindsey Graham goes down yet. It's possible, and he's not very well liked. But he's still Lindsey Graham. He's still an institution in South Carolina. So I think he's probably going to win a primary. Now for the general election, he's not a very strong candidate. He only won by 10 in 2020, which was like a big underperformance. So he's not a very strong candidate. I think in the end, it's like R+10 to maybe 12, because South Carolina has shifted to the right a bit since 2020. But, you know, it's still Lindsey Graham. Next, we got Ohio. So this is another special election, much like Florida. This was represented by J.D. Vance. This is his seat. But since he resigned to become, you know, vice president, he was replaced by John Husted, who was the lieutenant governor of Ohio, who's pretty well liked. He's a pretty strong candidate. And it doesn't really look like Tim Ryan might run for this, or Sherrod Brown might run for this. I think more likely one of them runs for governor, but a lot of them just kind of neglect Senate because John Husted is pretty approved of. And since he's a pretty new senator, like there's nothing for him to really be completely hated on, which is what it would take for a Democrat to win in Ohio, especially in a federal race. So in the end, it's still a Trump +11 state. And I think John Husted wins by around 10, just because of how good of a candidate he is. And because I don't really think Democrats are going to focus on this race. I think they're going to look more towards the governor race. And the final likely state that I have for Republicans, they're already at 50, so that's a majority, which means Democrats would need to take all of these states to get to a majority, or like maybe they lose Ohio and win Nebraska or something like that. That's to show the map is just horrible for them. But I'll continue. So the final likely state that I have for Republicans is the state of Iowa. This is represented by Joni Ernst, who is absolutely hated. She said some crazy stuff about Medicaid recently, which is like a PR person's worst nightmare. So it looked like she could be vulnerable, especially because Democrats have some decent nominees here, and because it looked like Iowa was going to be decently blue come 2026, like a lot bluer than the rest of the country, but not blue like statewide as a whole. But now it's actually starting to look like she's not going to run for re-election, which would be a net negative for Democrats, just because she's such a bad candidate that her retiring would actually be good for Republicans, even with losing incumbency. So in the end, because she's retiring, although Democrats have some decent candidates, Republicans have some other decent ones. And by avoiding her unpopularity, I think it's around like R+8. Now, if she does run for re-election, because Iowa is going to be closer than it normally is, I would have it at around like R+5. But since I don't think she will now, like she's even talking about it with like other Senate officials, I think Republicans are going to win the seat by around like 8 points. And already, with just the safe and likely states filled out, Republicans are already at 51 seats, locking Democrats out of even tying the Senate, which kind of puts into perspective how hard it really is for Democrats to flip the Senate in 2026. And now we're left with the 4 Senate races that I would truly consider competitive. These are the ones that I wouldn't be shocked by if they flipped hands come 2026. And let's just get started for the lean Democratic states, or the states that I think will go to Democrats by between 5 and 1 points. Let's start off with the state of North Carolina. This one's super interesting because it has changed so much, like the nominees especially. Tom Tillis announced his retirement like a month or so ago, like 15 days. And that was kind of like a 50-50 decision on how it would impact this race, whether it would be good for Republicans or whether it would be bad for Republicans. And it looks like it'll actually be bad for them because on the Republican side, it looks like Laura Trump will be the Republican nominee. And needless to say, this is a horrible choice. She lives in Florida. She was born in North Carolina, I believe, and she grew up in North Carolina, but she's not in North Carolina anymore. And the only reason she's being considered as the nominee is only because she's Trump's daughter-in-law, I think, is her relation. But either way, it's just going to be seen as nepotism and carpetbagging, and that's just not going to go over well. And for the Democratic side, things are looking as good for Democrats as they possibly could be because it looks like Roy Cooper is about to enter the race. He might have already entered by the time this video is out. It looks like it's going to be within the next week or so from the time I'm recording this for when he will be entering. And at this point, so much stuff has come out about him entering that if he didn't, I would actually be shocked. But yeah, I'm gonna mark this as lean Democratic, around like Cooper +4 to Laura Trump, because like I said, she's a very mid candidate at best and a bad candidate at worst. Not as bad as like a Mark Robinson or something, but they basically threw away this race. If they nominated someone else, like the North Carolina Republican Party chair or something like that, then they would have been comparable to Tom Tillis or a bit better than Tom Tillis. But because they picked Laura Trump instead, or at least that's who they're looking like they're going to pick, it's just kind of cooked. Even the RNC North Carolina chair seemed to have kind of endorsed a Laura Trump Senate run. So the only way that they kind of get out of this hole is that one, Roy Cooper doesn't announce, and instead Democrats have to go with Wiley Nickel, who is much more mid. And two, Laura Trump doesn't choose to run, and instead it is someone else. And both of those things would need to happen for Republicans to be the favorites here. And neither of them are looking like they're going to happen so far. So yeah, things are kind of cooked for North Carolina Republicans. D +4, maybe D +3.5 if it's Roy Cooper against Laura Trump. If it's Wiley Nickel against Laura Trump, then I think it's around like D +1. And if it's Wiley Nickel against someone else who's like not Laura Trump or Mark Robinson or something, like someone like normal, like a decent candidate for North Carolina Republicans, then I think it's around like tilt to lean R. But for now, around like D +3.5. And moving just south to Georgia, where Republicans have also gotten terrible news with Brian Kemp announcing he's not going to run a little bit ago. And yeah, that's a horrible sign. And now Jon Ossoff is getting great fundraising numbers. The Republican primary looks super competitive between a bunch of different candidates. And yeah, it looks cooked. Jon Ossoff is polling very high, like at 49% or getting close to 50%. And yeah, things just look kind of cooked. If I had to guess, I'd say Buddy Carter is the Republican nominee, but it could really be anyone. There's like 3 or 4 names that are flying out there. And I think all of them would probably lose to Ossoff by a lean margin. The question is just if it goes to a runoff or not. And I think if it did go to a runoff, it would help Jon Ossoff even more. The main factors for Ossoff, like the main limiting factors, I guess, are black turnout. And he's not black. He doesn't have very much black appeal, but he's great in the suburbs. And he doesn't even need that much black appeal, or he doesn't need to work as hard for it because Brian Kemp's not here. He doesn't have to, he's not going to lose that much ground in the suburbs where he has to make up a lot of ground in the inner city. That's just not going to happen. So I think he doesn't even have to worry about it that much. And he's in a very strong spot here. I'd say the Southeast for Democrats is looking very, very, very good. And they should be able to flip North Carolina Senate and hold on to Georgia Senate. And the final lean Democratic Senate race is the state of Michigan. This is a very, very, very interesting primary. Gary Peters is retiring, and it initially looked like Gretchen Whitmer was going to run for this, but she ended up announcing she's not going to, and she would have made the race likely D, but it looks like it's not going to be her. You have a couple different Democratic candidates. You have Haley Stevens, who is more moderate. You have Mallory McMorrow, who is more like liberal to kind of progressive leaning. And then you have Abdul Al-Sayed, I think is his name, who is pretty progressive. And I think probably all of them would win this race against who it looks like the Republican nominee is going to be, who is Mike Rogers, who was the former nominee for 2024, who lost by a hair against Elisa Slotkin. I think Haley Stevens and Mallory McMorrow would win by lean. And I think that Abdullah Saeed, I think it'd be a toss-up because he'd run on some good issues for Democrats like healthcare and labor rights, but he's also a bit too progressive for some rural voters and some more moderate voters. But he'd be great with Arab vote, I don't know. It's very 50-50 for him. I think it'd probably be tilt R, honestly, but he looks like he's polling in second place with Haley Stevens polling in first and Mallory McMorrow polling in third. I think McMorrow could win. She's got very good fundraising numbers, but if I had to guess right now, I'd say it's Haley Stevens. And I think she wins the general election by around 2 to 3 points. Although this could be decently competitive, depending on, once again, who Democrats nominate and just like the kind of campaign that Haley Stevens runs in the general election, if she is the nominee. And those 3 competitive seats going to Democrats put them at 48 seats, which puts them 3 seats away from a majority, which they obviously can't get. But it puts them 1 seat away from being in a pretty good spot for 2028. The question is, will they get to Maine? This is held by Susan Collins. And much like what I did with Alaska in the last video, which you should check out, I'm just going to explain the political geography before I give my final assessment on the state. So Maine is obviously a likely D state. It went to Harris by likely, it went to Biden by likely, it went to Clinton by lean. The nation has become more polarized over the years, so being in a Republican incumbent in a likely blue state isn't really that good for you. Sherrod Brown lost re-election, John Tester lost re-election, even Bob Casey lost re-election, and they were all in 3 states that weren't really too supportive of Democrats at the time, just because of polarization is why they lost. And Susan Collins, she's been winning re-election by very large margins over the last few years, but her margins have been becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller over the years, to the point where in 2020 she only won by around like 7 or 8, which was a massive overperformance, but that's around half of how much she won by the previous cycle. And even then, she probably would have only won by around 4 if you account for like ranked choice voting and all that. So I think she's very definitely like beatable in Maine. The question is, who are Democrats really going to pick? Because in Maine, there are 3 main Democratic candidates that have been floating around as like top nominees for different offices. There's Jared Golden, who's the representative from Maine 2nd. There's Troy Jackson, who is like a state senator, I believe, or state representative from Maine 2nd. And there is Janet Mills, who is oh my god. And there's Janet Mills, who is the incumbent Democratic governor, who won by a pretty strong margin in 2024. There's also Sherry Pingree, but she already lost to Susan Collins a while ago. So I don't really see her running. Those are the main 3, but Troy Jackson is running for governor, and Jared Golden is probably running for re-election in his House seat. So it really only leaves Janet Mills. And the question is she gonna run? And for now, if I had to bet money, I'd say she doesn't run. And if she doesn't run, that leaves Democrats a few options. They could probably go with some like random state senator or state house member, and that could get the job done. The only real candidate who has entered the race so far is Katie Porter's former staffer, which like, yeah, that's not going to be a very good candidate. So for now, assuming Janet Mills doesn't run, I'm going to give the race to Susan Collins by around 2 to 3, just because Democrats don't really have that good of a candidate. So it's hard for me to really see them flipping a seat, which has been so hard for them to flip for so long. But if Janet Mills were to run, that race immediately transforms to lean D. And if Democrats can find a decent like state house or state rep member, it goes to tilt D. Because make no mistake, Susan Collins is very beatable. The question is just, are Democrats going to go for it? And it looks like they're actually not. You know, 2 of the 3 Democrats have already declined, and it looks like Janet Mills might decline too. Maybe just Democrats are super afraid of Susan Collins, which kind of makes no sense because she's very beatable. So just that's the main dilemma for Maine Democrats. Are they going to put someone up? And if they do, I think Susan Collins goes down. But if they don't put up anyone too strong, then I think she wins re-election. So this is my final Senate map. There was 1 seat that changed hands, which was North Carolina. The Senate is 48 Democrats to 52 Republicans, which means Republicans secured control of the chamber. But it puts Democrats in a decent spot for 2028, where they would need to hold on to all of their competitive seats and flip Wisconsin and North Carolina and the presidency to win the Senate. But it's still possible, and way more possible than here. If Democrats want to win the Senate here, their best path is what I already lined out, plus Maine. And then you got to pick out 2 of Nebraska, Iowa, and Ohio, like Nebraska and Ohio, for example, which just, I don't really see that happening, honestly. It's very tough. Or like maybe Nebraska and Texas, but you know, it's a very tough path for Democrats, and I'd probably rate the Senate as safe R. For now, I'd say Republicans probably have over a 90% chance of holding the chamber, whereas the House is something that's a lot more favorable for Democrats. And if you want to check that out, the video for that is in the description alongside my governor prediction. If you like the video, then maybe subscribe. It would really help me out. Or like the video, or comment future predictions that I could do, or if you disagree with this, or what changes you might make. So just let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hey. Yeah, baby. Hey. I want you to be mine again, baby. I know your lifestyle is driving me crazy.